Hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking around for the Q&A of Someone Lives Here. My name is Dominique O'Neill, and I'm a programmer at SF DocFest. It is my pleasure to introduce director Zach Russell. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to show the film in San Francisco.
Yeah, and we're glad that we can experience it here. Can you please tell us what brought you to the story?
Yeah, so it was in the middle of the pandemic and I had insomnia and I was just looking at the news feed on my phone and I saw this story about a carpenter who was building tiny shelters. Um, and I had some kind of vision quickly, which sounds very grandiose, but whatever. I had a little vision of a tiny shelter and a voice coming from it. And I had never made a documentary before, and I didn't really know what I was doing. So I sort of took this news article and I pitched it to a bunch of documentary filmmaker friends, and nobody was took the bait. And then I met with him, and it kind of snowballed from there. And so yeah, it was this little news article, and then this idea of really like a way into homelessness that was not just me with a camera bombarding an encampment or people living outside. It felt like a really interesting way into the homelessness unhoused world of our city.
Yeah. And you said you've never made a documentary before. Have you made other films, or
Yeah, I've
do
made
you have any
some
background? Okay.
short films and some television more as a writer.
Mhm.
But yeah, never wanted to make a documentary, never made a documentary, never thought about it. Really was just not on my radar at all. But now I have done it for probably the one and only time I'll ever do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us about building your relationship with Khalil?
Yeah, he was definitely very hesitant when I got in touch. I feel like there's this thing in the Jewish faith where you're like, they say no to you three times if you try to join, if you're persistent. Anyway, it felt a bit like that. Like he definitely said no three or four times, but then he got in touch asking me if I could help him make a how-to video because he wanted to show other people that were volunteering how to build them. So I did that, kind of got my foot in the door.
Mhm.
And I think because I didn't approach it as a documentary filmmaker, I didn't have much baggage from having made other films. I sort of began to see myself almost as his videographer and communications guy. And so I very quickly became part of the team. And that felt good because I really did believe in what he was doing and I saw the effects of it firsthand quite immediately. So it felt like my film became very secondary to his project. And I think he had a sense that I was dedicated to what he was doing, and that made it easier to tolerate me and to tolerate the cameras for so long because we did film with him for about a year. But yeah, it's an interesting thing, a relationship with a subject. I think there's always some exploitation happening. There's always some stress from having a camera on you that you just can't
Mhm.
avoid. So really all I could do was just try to give as much like on the other side of it as I could. But I'm keenly aware that even when someone wants to be in a documentary, there's still a cost to them. Yeah, that I don't think can ever really be repaid. So anyway, that's random thoughts about that.
What about Taka? How did you find her the film's de facto narrator?
Yeah, so part of what I was doing was I was with Khalil a lot filming, and then I was volunteering in some parks. We had a lot of
Mhm.
encampments cropping up in downtown parks during that time. And she just sort of walked into the park one day while I was volunteering with some mutual aid people. And she pointed at a tiny shelter and she's like, "Oh, what's that? That looks great." And so we struck up a little relationship and a couple days later, she was staying in the park then, and we had an extra tiny shelter that night. We weren't sure where to go with it, and I was like, "What if we go to this lady that I just met?" And so we delivered one, and yeah, we just developed this very slow relationship. But I knew from the minute I heard her talk I was like, that's something about her voice. And I mean, she'll say that in Canada, at least, we love an accent. And so the fact that she has this kind of thick Soviet, Russian, Ukrainian, she's half Russian,
Mm,
Ukrainian, really was appealing to me. And then, yeah, we just sort of built a friendship. And I would say that friendship has like carried, through now. Like she was at my house yesterday and we've become very close friends. And I really am grateful to her,
mhm,
yeah, for everything that she did with the film. And we had a really long story that happened after the film. Like a lot of people ask, well, where is she now? And so after
mhm.
we stopped filming, Khalil bought her a trailer and she was living in a proper trailer on some like backcountry land in outskirts of town. And then the neighbors there got fussy and she had some difficulty. So I helped her find an apartment and I found some various government assistance programs and with a bit of personal fundraising. And now she has an apartment that is just a couple blocks from me, and has been housed
Wow.
there for a year and a half, going on 2 years. And she's come with us to film festivals and is having I think, a pretty nice time being housed. Yeah, so that's Taka's a happy end for her that is not in the film.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's terrific. That's really great to hear. There's several people in the film, like Taka, who don't want to be filmed, don't want to have their face shown. Did you find a lot of resistance from the community to be Like, did you find resistance when you were out there asking for interviews?
You know, I think it really depended on the person and the context and how long they've known me. But no, I
Hmm.
didn't find so much resistance. I think I felt like it was hard to have a relationship that was different from a news camera because there's a lot, especially during that time, there was a lot of journalists coming in and out, and kind of doing these like
Mm,
flyby stories where they would find someone, they would interview them on camera, it would be on the news that night. So I felt like it was harder to develop something that wasn't that kind of relationship. There was always there are very public unhoused people in Toronto who are really eager to be on camera and to talk and
mhm,
to speak to the issues. But I really wanted something that was, I kind of wanted the people that didn't want to be on camera, basically.
mhm,
I was more drawn to them and felt like there was something there more for me. So yeah, I think I picked the wrong or the right subjects. Yeah, I mean, there was this
yeah.
one man who we had such a good time together and but he had family back in his country. He had sons and they didn't know that he was living unhoused for 3 years here.
Mm,
And so he was just like, it's like people's reasons are also so interesting and personal to me.
yeah.
But again, they make them more compelling as subjects because they're not, I don't know. That's what I find. I mean, and Khalil was the same. He did not want to be on camera, but he really was passionate about this thing he was doing. And so kind of made this sacrifice to become a public figure to get his goal achieved. And yeah, I think those are the more interesting people to me than people who want to be uh front facing. Yeah.
Mhm, yeah. Um, Khalil has this like really unique and original laugh almost at the end of every sentence. But then when things start to go downhill with the tiny shelters, he seems to spiral a little bit, and we don't actually see that much of him anymore in the film. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think it was hard to know what to do, and his hands were very much tied by our local government here, by the city. And so it felt like, I mean, we continued to film quite a lot, but
Hmm.
the footage was mostly him sitting at home, not being able to do anything. And I think that the subject matter of the film was really his project, as opposed to him, and so that's kind of why he recedes,
Hmm.
because I think what I didn't want to do was make it a film about him and his psyche, and like his person, because he didn't want that. he didn't want like a really intimate look at who he was. He wanted it to be about this project that he was doing. And so, and I respect that. And I feel like there was so much in the filming and the developing of the film. When we would show it to people, a lot of more traditional documentary film producers would give feedback like they want to know that he's homeless or that he's experienced homelessness right away, and they want like a character driven story. And while on the one hand I think we have that, I also think there's like a little bit of respect and balance that we're trying to have, where it's not just this sort of about this person, it's about the thing that he does and the way that society reacts to it.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that answers your question about him receding,
Hmm.
but yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And actually on that note, I was curious about including the voice of someone like Valentina. Can you tell us about her and including her voice in the film?
Yeah, it's gotten so many different reactions. I've had people come up to me and say that I did her dirty and that it was terrible what I've done by including her, and that I should be ashamed. And I've had people come up to me and say by including her, I'm sort of platforming someone that has the wrong views and I'm promoting her point of view. So I'm really curious what people in your audience are thinking right now about her. A lot of people will also watch the film and absolutely hate her by the end of it. So she's a polarizing figure in the
Hmm.
movie. She, I really am grateful to her for being so adamant about sharing what she thinks and knowing full well that she could come off like a villain. I mean, she would say to me, I hope I don't sound bad and maybe I sound like the villain in this. But I think unlike a lot of people in Canada, she's actually willing to say what she thinks instead of just quietly thinking it. So for that, I think it's great because I really wanted the voice of someone who didn't want these people living in the park and didn't really care where they went and lived in such close proximity but had no relationship, because I think that that's sort
Hmm.
of representative of the majority of people here. So yeah, so but I mean, as to whether she's seen the film and her reaction, that I don't know. Like she definitely knows the film exists. But I didn't invite her to the premiere, kind of because I just didn't want her to have to deal with the public, I guess. I feel like she did me a sort of generosity by being in the film, and now I'm doing her a bit of a, maybe it's seen as a generosity by not dragging her into its public release. So
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know what to make of did that make any sense what I just said?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And I actually think like what Khalil says in the film about, when people express these concerns and that's their most pressing issue right now, that's still a reality for them. Like it may not be something we agree with, but it was an issue for her and that's her reality
And I
and
mean,
that's that.
homeowners, yeah, like they've got a lot of money on the line potentially if they see it as an
Mhm.
investment. And then what if the value of all their life's work goes down because there are yeah, like he said, it's a legitimate thing. And I think I've adopted this ethos that he has, which is like at least they're saying it. It's the people that
Mhm.
don't tell you what their issues are that I think you have to be more circumspect about, because then how can you move past it if no one's saying what it is? Um, yeah, so I just think also like it's unfortunate, but I think Jung would have something to say about her final line in the movie about how her friends were homeless because they sold their house. And now, like I think
Mhm.
unconsciously she knows there's something going on and she can't help but dance around it. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tell us about shooting during COVID.
Yeah, shooting during COVID. Well, we were a very light crew, about half of the time I was alone with the camera, and the
Mhm.
other half of the time I had the cinematographer there with me. So it was just ever two of us. Um, and I think a majority of film was shot outside.
Mhm.
Uh, but it was, I guess, because it's all I've ever known, it seemed very normal to me that we were all masked up and that the world was shut down. Um, I think maybe more. it felt like, at least in Toronto during COVID, there were very few things that were socially acceptable to do. And one of the only things was kind of helping other people, and this idea of mutual aid. That was like that was seen as a kind of acceptable social engagement. And
Mm-hmm.
so in that way, it was a kind of amazing relief to be able to get out of the house and feel like you were helping people. Um, yeah, so I guess that would be my answer about the COVID of it all. It's like I
Mm-hmm.
felt very lucky that I got to go and do something that I cared about during that time, and that I didn't feel conflicted about it, that I didn't feel like, oh, should we really be filmed? It's like it felt quite essential to
Mm-hmm.
people's survival. So that was nice.
Right. And what about, did you have any difficulties yourself as a filmmaker with the city?
Yeah, I mean, very minor. Very minor. I think it was more I became paranoid. And I sort of took on this idea that they were out to get the project and they were out to get unhoused people. And I sort of identify, maybe not over identified, but I started to really identify with the work that Khalil was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Coming for me now. Sorry, there was a siren out there. So I did develop this kind of paranoia about the city. And I remember like sitting with Taka doing an interview, and there was a city worker kind of like in the park near us. And I just was like, I couldn't focus on what she was saying because I was like, what are they? So I don't, yeah. But as far as actual interaction, it was mostly just like stonewalling, and not wanting to talk. And then, I mean, at a certain point, I think they probably would have been interested in giving their interview and speaking in the film, but they have such a great PR team, and like they have people that are paid $100,000 to do their public communications, and I just wasn't interested in like helping that machine continue to give its messaging out. People hear it enough in the news, and they have such a control over the narrative around unhoused people in this city, that I was sort of like, this can be an alternate history to the one that they've put forward. And then since then, I mean, it's interesting. Like we have a new mayor. The new mayor was kind of really interested in the film, but then she didn't come to the screening. A lot of the city council members that are in the film are still on city council. The former mayor, John Tory, who is the sort of, I would say, the key villain of the film, he resigned. But he's still floating around. Like the most surreal thing was we were nominated for the Toronto Film Critics something award. Anyway, we go to this gala and he's there. This guy who's in the film is there, sitting there because he's part of this elite class of people, and he's watching bits of the film that he's in without consenting to be in, and he's sitting there eating and drinking, and we're at this hotel. And anyway, so they're all around still, and I feel like my paranoia is not like I'm not convinced that they won't all try to, I don't know, do something horrendous to me or to the film, but so far so good.
Yeah. Um, well, we
Rambling.
learned by the end of the sorry, we learned by the end of the film that Khalil is forbidden from placing any structures on city property. So I'm curious if you can shed a little light on what he's up to now, and if you have anything you can share about the unhoused communities.
Yeah. What he so he took a bit of a break, and then he joined forces with a bunch of architects and advocates, and they developed something called Two Steps Home, which was like a proposal to create tiny shelter communities, tiny home communities, tiny home communities, with city input and agreement. So it would be like them getting land from the city and creating a kind of permanent infrastructure that would be seen as transitional between being unhoused and getting permanent housing. And they basically these little tiny homes that have some communal facilities. And so he was actually trying to work again with the city. And I don't know how far that project's gotten. I think what he discovered over the course of a year of doing this with, very well versed policymakers, architects, people who've been trying to work in housing for quite a long time. I think he discovered just the speed is so astronomically slow, that I think he's maybe now taken a step back again because of yeah, I mean, it's sort of a life of meetings and petitioning and presenting and waiting to get something like 50 tiny homes built. So I know that the project hasn't, like, they haven't put a shovel in the ground, and I'm not sure where the city's at as far as their agreement to it. Yeah, so it's a bit of another kind of slightly depressing end on that, where just the bureaucracy and the time that things take is maddening when you have people in crisis outside. And then as far as how we're doing in Toronto, like yeah, I don't know. I think it's the sort of the same, but I think that what the city has done in the past couple of years is they've made a real effort to make homelessness invisible here. And so you just don't have people camping to the same degree in public parks. And so now there's people camping on church property, and some parks, but not the parks from before, and basically sort of same as it ever was, but with a little bit less visibility. Yeah, so I wish I had more uplifting things to say about that.
Well, I'll just ask you one final question, which is that in the film, Cleo says that he's not an activist. He's just sees a need that he can provide something for. As a filmmaker making this film, how do you feel about being called an activist, or do you identify with that term?
I think Khalil's reasoning for not identifying is because he thinks that what he's doing is quite reasonable, and he wants to be in the center. He wants to be like something that everyone should agree with. And I would say that I feel similarly about that. I don't think it should be so radical to care about unhoused people, or to want to give them a standard where they can survive. So yeah, but then and I think like maybe the pretentious filmmaker in me before making this would say, oh, I don't want to make activist films or message films. I just want to make films that are good and they stand on their own. And I guess I don't really care anymore about that distinction. Happy to be used as a tool for something that I do believe in and am passionate about. So yeah, if an activist is someone that actually believes in something, then sure, because I do believe in the rights of unhoused people to exist, and that everyone maybe agrees with that on some superficial level, but I think maybe my views are slightly more, I don't know, radical than the average person in this city. So I guess in that sense, sure. But as you can tell, I'm deeply uncomfortable with the label as
Yeah.
well.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there.
Okay.
Thank you so much for telling the story, for um, showing us a peek into this world, and it's an issue that is not just specific to Toronto or even San Francisco, and it's important to remember that it's a crisis.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you. Okay.